This is the second in creating extremely good websites. The first Idealware hosted with us about a month ago was on usability, and that is available currently on our YouTube channel, LSNTAP videos. This is the second in that series on website accessibility, and it's extremely well timed as LSNTAP is about to put out a short little 20-page guide on using or on creating accessible websites, and we'll be following this up with a user roundtable later this year where individuals can get together and kind of discuss informally accessibility practices, their own tools for testing that type of stuff. Very excited here to have Idealware. Turning it over to, thank you.
Fantastic. Hi, let's just do, actually before we do that, let's do some introductions. By the way, the beeps that you're hearing are people joining us, so the beeps will slow down presumably as more people actually are on the line. I am Laura Quinn. I'm the executive.
Oh, we can actually turn those beeps. Under the phone setting, there's a chime on Join Me where we can turn those off.
Ah, I will turn them off. Great. Now they are off. Great. I'm Executive Director of Idealware. For those of you who are not familiar with Idealware, we are a nonprofit ourselves, and our mission is to provide information to help other nonprofits make smart technology decisions, everything from back office to social media, certainly including websites and things like accessibility, which we are covering today. And I'm really excited to have with us today Rachel Margiaro, who is, which I think I probably just mangled her name, she's a true expert in assistive technology from the Pacer Center and the Simon Technology Center there. You want to talk a little about yourself, Rachel?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Margiaro, but it doesn't matter. I respond to all of them.
Sorry.
And no problem. And well, I am a assistive technology specialist here at the Simon Technology Center. And what we do is we assess the needs and limitations of children and adults who just acquire some kind of disability. And then we find the correct assistive technology or mainstream technology that might be able to close that gap and allow them to keep having that same quality of life that they had before, or just helping parents to raise their kids with the same opportunities and making sure that they are able to achieve the things that they want them to achieve. So that's what we do in a nutshell. We do consultations and in-services. We also do training in different softwares, and we do not create any products. We use what's out there right now. And Pacer is a nonprofit which specializes in advocacy for parents with children with disabilities. And myself, my background is I have an MBA, and I also have a master's in interaction design. And I specialize specifically in user experience and social media technology rollout, because my main interest is to make sure that accessibility is it's not an afterthought, but a thought in the process of developing technology. So I did work for years in product development and done accessibility consulting for a long time. And I'm also blind myself, so it's a little bit of self-interest, but also, now that I work with people with dyslexia and dysgraphia and making sure that kids can read and write and access information, and also all people that have different degrees of vision, I realize that it's not just self-interest, but also there's many, many professionals out there that you don't even know that they're dyslexic and they struggle with the accessibility.
Absolutely. Terrific. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So we'll talk just a little bit about kind of our frame for this seminar, which is the idea of so we're providing access to justice. If we are trying to provide equal access to justice, who are we potentially excluding by not making your website accessible? So we're very much going to take that person frame to this. So what are the types of things that can help actual people who have disabilities of various kinds to access your content? And we'll talk through that in 6 steps. So 6 steps to an accessible website will be the majority of our content. We'll then take a little bit of a look at tools for testing the accessibility of your website, so different ways to think about how accessible your website is. And we'll wrap up by talking about WC3 and 508, which I know are, so 508 in particular is probably top of mind for a lot of folks. We're purposely going through kind of from the person aspect I feel often that accessibility is far too often couched as you should do this because the government requires you to. So we're going to go through first from kind of a human perspective, and then we'll come back around and talk about how 508 fits in with what we've done and the specific requirements for 508 compliance. Fantastic. Any questions or comments about just kind of our frame or what we're hoping to get to? Actually, let me do a quick check-in with you guys. If you could just, through the chat, so into the chat box, type just a quick comment or two about what it is that you'd be particularly disappointed if we don't cover today. So if you type that into the chat in a few words, I will read those as they come in, and we'll sit here in silence and wait until you type. This is like a threat, so I just sit here in silence until someone chats something. So no one wants to get anything out of the seminar today. Wow. All right. So here's a few. So sorry, go ahead. Mark says, testing accessibility, since I have no idea how to proceed with that. Fantastic. Great. Brian, anything in particular you're hoping to get out of the seminar?
Well, one of the things that I will definitely talk about some is dyslexia and areas where the Bobby 508 and W3C standards don't deal with that. As a few of you know, I'm extremely dyslexic. I use Dragon Naturally Speaking for everything. My spelling is terrible. Same thing with grammar. So it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart.
Great. Fantastic. And Maryland State Law Library says we're early in considering this for one of our sites. All right, great. So we not a very talkative group today, but we have some sense, and that would also give me the sense that a lot of people are kind of don't know what they don't know, so are looking to get kind of a broad overview. Here's a couple more coming in. Steve says, what format design immediately creates a bad impression for a viewer? That's a really interesting question, and we'll definitely talk some about some of those things. Danielle says, what can I do to improve our existing program site accessibility? Absolutely, kind of our whole frame here. So let's just run through the concept of, if you don't make your website accessibility, who are you excluding? Shouldn't we provide equal access to justice to everyone? And that would include people who are colorblind, are dyslexic, can't see well, accessible to those who have difficulty using their hands or are deaf, for instance. Also, a lot of the things that you do in this realm that are good for folks who are, for instance, blind or deaf or have seeing impairments are also really good to help with simply people who aren't all that literate, who don't speak English well, aren't familiar with U.S. technology norms, for instance. They don't know, like, for instance, that you click on a picture of a house to go back to a home page, or just in general are not particularly tech savvy. So all of those people are people that we're trying to provide equal justice to as well. And these folks see the web differently. They may need to rely on screen readers or keyboard shortcuts. The picture that we're actually looking at right now is, in fact, simply a hugely magnified screen that somebody who has low vision might, and this is actually something that you see fairly frequently. Someone with fairly low vision might just zoom way in. But to imagine the kind of the experience for someone like this, or someone on a screen reader, which we'll talk about in more depth, or someone who can't use their hands, can't use a mouse, is reliant on other ways to use the keyboard. Kind of how to think about how they experience your website. So that's an overall kind of like, okay, here's why you should be thinking about this. Rachel, do you have anything to add about kind of why it's important to support these types of folks, or what we should be thinking about here?
Yeah, I think it's very important to think, it's not just severe disabilities, but there is also many people out there that, for example, lose some of their sites, but they wouldn't be able to use the same resources that I can that's offered to me. So they get all their information solely from websites and, e-materials, electronic materials.
Yep.
Yeah, another motivator for individuals is that the LSC Technology Initiative grant assurances also require that we develop things in an accessible format. So it's definitely written into the TIG grant structure also.
Great, always a key motivator, the funding stream. All right, so let's talk about 6 steps. So basically 6 things that one can do, one can think about in order to make a more accessible website. So we're going to talk through all of these in detail, but to kind of give you the roadmap, we're going to start by talking about making your text itself accessible. So certainly it doesn't really help anyone if your text is like this gigantic, screen filled with legalese and no headers and no white space. Thinking about providing alternatives to images, so people who can't see images, to make sure that they can also access your information. Making text high contrast and legible, so to make sure that people who have limited vision can see it. We'll talk about accommodating screen readers. So screen readers are devices used by those who are blind or very low visibility to essentially read websites to them in a fairly sophisticated way. So we'll talk about what those are and how you would accommodate them. We'll talk about designing for people who aren't using a mouse, so thinking about folks who either have limited mobility in their hands or just prefer to use a keyboard. And then finally we'll talk about basically not breaking the general defaults that things have, and if you don't break them. So browsers tend to be generally accessible if you don't muck around with your site to the extent that you break them. All right, so let's dive in here and start by talking about our first step here, making your text itself accessible. Some of this idea is actually really quite redundant with the things we talked about 2 weeks ago in terms of usability, because in fact exactly the same thing that are likely to help somebody who is who has low visibility or is on a screen reader is also likely to be very useful to people who aren't super literate or are simply in a hurry or all of those things. So splitting up text into scannable chunks is one really good good tip here, with the idea that you don't want an incredible block of legalese. You want to make sure that people can scan through it. So this is good for everyone, but especially important if someone is using a screen reader, for instance, and everything is all one gigantic paragraph. There's no way to get any summary of that. They just need to basically listen to the whole thing. Similarly, summarizing. So thinking about making sure that there is a summary of what the sections and the paragraphs are about before you dive into the details is really helpful. Again, it helps everyone, but it's particularly helpful for those on a screen reader because they can skip through to try to get a sense as to what each section is about without having to actually listen to everything. Certainly think about reading level. This is more towards the realm of somebody who might have some mental disability or might not be a native English speaker or those types of things. But certainly having just this really dense, very high-level academic text is going to be hard for many, many people to parse. And so it helps everybody to try to simplify and to put it at a fairly low reading level.
Yeah, one of the best resources out there for that particular area is the WriteClearly.org site, which was created by, I believe it was Western New York's program that does a really good job of parsing through your language that's currently available and then suggesting alternatives. It's focused on legal text, so it definitely is aimed at our community also. Liz put the URL for that in the chat.
Terrific. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah,
and one more thing,
and I just wanted to...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rachel. So let me just finish out this section. So one... You go.
Sorry, you're echoing a little bit, but go ahead.
The one last thing I wanted to talk about in this section is thinking about whether or not the language is easily translatable. So making it accessible to people who don't speak your language. So the ability to, for instance, as we're seeing here, to read something in Spanish. So Rachel, it sounds like you've got stuff to add here.
Yes,
Rachel,
sorry. Yes, yeah, I am sorry. It was the muting thing wasn't coming out. But what I wanted to add is that, there's a lot of people that have problem with conversion. So having those little, snippets of text are very important for that summary. And then it's very important too that, that you make that text so it's actually a text and not a picture of a text, because many times you make a little summary and you create little screenshots and you place them in there. And I know we're going to cover that, but that makes it unreadable to a screen reader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that people have trouble with conversion. Can you just talk a little about what that means?
Oh, sure. So conversion is if they have a really big chunk of text, their eyes starts converging. So, when we are looking at the horizon, this is called kind of conversion. It's how your lines are coming together. So instead of they're being able to separate one letter from another, those lines actually converge on each other, and then it doesn't make any sense. So those people need to create chunks to read. And usually they use a site called LiveInk to do that, so you can break down into paragraphs and all that. But if it's already broken down in chunks that make sense, then it's a lot easier, so they don't have to go look for another software in order to break down and be able to read, text. And there is like a space in between those chunks instead of being one huge chunk.
Absolutely.
Does that explain?
Fantastic. Yes, it does. Thank you very much. So that's our kind of our first step in accessibility. Any questions or other thoughts from anybody as to either things that we should be doing or things that you're wondering about? Into the chat, or you can hit *6 to unmute yourself. All right. So let's dive on to step number 2. And this is, as Rachel mentioned, providing alternative to images. So images are basically not viewable by somebody who is using a screen reader. So it's important to think about all of the people who might be using that and what you might have as images. It's frequent that you have stuff on your website as images you're not really thinking about as images, so you don't necessarily think about an alternative. So the basic gist here is that if you have information that is important, you want to provide an alternative for people who have difficulty seeing. So here, in fact, this is a good example of, so this is Legal Aid of Cleveland. And this, in fact, is not an image. This is text that's put on top of the image, which is, in fact, readable. But if this were, like one could imagine making this whole banner an image, and that would then be, and you would need to do something like alt text, which we'll talk about in a minute, to make it viewable. You also
one
need
of
to
the
think
most
about,
common One of the most common mistakes that I see in reviewing websites is individuals will take and make the pieces of their navigation bar very stylized, cool-looking images without providing that alt text. So then an individual with a screen reader just sees blank image, blank image, blank image while they're attempting to navigate through the site.
Absolutely. This is,
if I may, I think another issue.
Go for it.
If I made another issue is the alt tag has to make sense. So think about it. I see, for example, maybe put an icon, and then somebody puts, I don't know, graphic of a house. Well, that might not mean anything to somebody that's completely blind because they don't have that relationship with that iconography. But, somebody that is dyslexic and does see, then, yeah, that makes sense. But otherwise, so try to be a little bit more, explanatory about what you're trying to convey.
Absolutely. And in fact, we've got a slide for that idea that alt text is not just about kind of slapping any text for an image, but slapping something, not slapping at all, putting something that is actually useful in place of the text. So for instance here, instead of just picture of a student, which basically tells me nothing, a postgraduate engineering student working in the new electron minimiscope lab. Or thinking about, for instance, if in fact you have a graphic that is basically doing nothing but being decorative, don't put like decorative swirl in the alt text because basically it's not helpful. There is no information there. So, other thoughts on that, Rachel? Certainly you have much more experience thinking about this than I.
Well, I do kind of care sometimes, but that's just because I'm a designer. But yes, it's useless to know that is a swirl in there.
Yep, absolutely. Great. The same is true for videos, that you need to think about videos require both reasonable sight and reasonable hearing. So if you're providing information with them alone, then you will lose a fair chunk of audience with any kind of disability. So things like captions can be a help for someone to, with a screen reader, be able to understand, or for someone who is deaf to be able to see what's being said. So this is actually a tough balance because in the usability course, we actually recommended that it's often useful to have videos as an alternative to having a bunch of text. So to kind of balance the information that you're providing to try to hit both your audience who might really be helped by explanatory videos with them for whom the videos are not usable or seeable.
A great tip there with regards to videos specifically is YouTube has enabled a feature that will go through your video and create a text narration of it that is lined up in time correctly. It is not perfect, but if you're going through and captioning, this speeds the captioning process up significantly. It cuts about 2/3 of the time out because you don't have to line things up. You just have to go through and proofread and make sure or make minor edits to it. Very nice feature. We've started to use it on several of our videos for Northwest Justice Project.
And if I may also, there is another problem that is, embedding links within the video. That will never be accessible by a screen reader. I know that often they do that, so you don't have to click in the link. You actually have to type it in, usually for a survey or something. But it's very important to at least put it in the, if you're using YouTube, have it in the, in the comments section, or even have some kind of a downloadable script that people can actually read.
Absolutely. And here's another thing to keep in mind just as you're doing, kind of thinking about your own site. It's important not to rely on screenshots alone. So for instance, an annotated filing form is it might be a very useful thing to the majority of your audience, but is going to be completely, so you're never going to be able to put in alt text what the information that you are actually trying to convey with these annotations. So you might think of two versions. Okay, here is the annotated screenshot of the filing form, and here's a version that conveys this information in text for those who can't see the screenshot.
And it's important that alternative, it's close to it.
Yes.
So if you have the screenshot, maybe you can have an invisible link or something that only the screen reader will be able to read.
Oh, that's an interesting option. Talk a little more about that.
Yeah, so, you can create kind of like, I think in HTML they call anchor. So you don't need to, you anchor to a part of the page or to go to the next page. So what you do is you can create a link that you just put an alt tag in there. You will see if you hover over it, but you don't need to create, a link that quote unquote might mess up your design. So you can have a screenshot and then right next to it or above or below or however it works, you can create this link that will be only visible for screen readers, and then the person can click, and it could be something simple as, so you have the screenshot, and it's important to put names on your screenshot. So if that screenshot is about, let's see, a screenshot on how to use the iPhone. So now you have a screenshot. It says how to use iPhone screenshot. Then there is description, and you click on there, and then now I'm going to see what's on that screenshot. And then makes it really sleek, well-designed, but it's still useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Terrific. Just another thing to think about in this realm of images is icons. So there's a couple of problems with relying on icons alone. Number one is that actually most of us probably, it's very quickly you get to a place where you can't represent clearly in an icon, and most of us can't figure out what you mean. Visually impaired people may not be able to see an icon, and icons tend to rely on cultural conventions. So people who are not native to the U.S. or to the Western world may not be able to understand them. So for instance, you've got the idea of like a house, for instance. Why do I go back to the main page of my website when I click on a house? So that's simply a convention that we call it the home page that may not translate very well. Great. Other tips or thoughts or questions on the idea of providing alternatives to images on the site? Great. All right. So let's talk about making text high contrast and legible. So something that is close to, again, most of our hearts. There's very few of us who would, regardless of our, ability to see, would prefer something where we have, dark blue text on medium blue text or yellow text on yellow text, like we have on this site. This is bad for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is that somebody who has low, is not very able to see as well is going to have even a harder time than the rest of us in seeing it. So you want to keep text a dark color on a white background.
Well, I think too, and this will be an option. It's not necessarily, but if you really want to make it 100% completely accessible, you can have a CSS where all your white background becomes black and all your dark letters become white. So then you can have a little link that says black on white, and that will help a lot of seniors that have really degraded vision or people that have low vision.
I actually didn't know that. So white text on black is actually more visible than black text on white?
Not for everyone. So for some, for example, people that have conversion issues too, the darker background will help to avoid that conversion issue. So this is usually people that have strokes or had brain injuries, or it can get affected on their conversion. And then there's also problems with low vision. So yes, that will make the letters kind of pop out per se a little better. But for most people that do have sight, it will have the opposite effect. So, and this is something really easy and simple to do with having two CSS style sheets for your site.
Yep. So just running through a couple other things here to think about in terms of legibility. Obviously, you want to make sure that the size is legible, that you don't want to have really tiny text. And you want to consider adding, allowing people to make it bigger. Often browsers, if you don't break this, browsers will allow people to make it bigger automatically, or you can make it even more obvious by putting an actual option to increase the text size at the top of your website. And finally, in this realm, remember the colorblind, that if you are using only color to represent things, then there's a couple of different kinds of color blindness, and you want to think carefully about whether or not people can see it. So for instance, actually, this is a graph off of Google Analytics, where you can see on the right here this simulated view of what the colorblind would see. Basically, you've got two murky greens, which are almost indistinguishable from each other. If you didn't have the stats to the right of this, this would be virtually meaningless to the colorblind. So important to kind of keep in mind just the legibility of the information on your site. Rachel, Brian, thoughts in this realm?
Yeah, I think in the color blindness side, what's important to think is, if you're using any hues of greens and reds, which is the most typical color blindness, you're going to run into issues. The second most common will be blue and yellow. So if you're doing some kind of combination, or blue and blue, yellow, yellow, or blue and yellow, then you might run into issues also. And then the third one is purple, but I can't remember what's the opposite color to it. And it's the most, that's the most rare one.
So the guide that we've got coming out a little bit later this month has some websites in there where you can basically go to the site, and then it will apply a style sheet that will let you see what it would look like to someone who is colorblind, as a way to kind of do some quick testing on that. I'll see if we can find a link to add to the chat for that. But it definitely tends to be pretty revealing. It's something that the automated checkers for websites are just horrible at testing for, because the computer can't tell which of those color contrast issues are a lot of the time, so it needs to be tested by a person.
Right. And we have some links for those ourselves. So Liz has, in fact, posted one, and we have some of those ourselves when we get to our section on thinking about testing your own website.
Great.
Fantastic. dive in a little bit to step number 4, accommodating screen readers. And actually, Rachel, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, put you on a little bit on the spot. Would you mind taking a minute or so to kind of explain kind of a bit about how a screen reader works and what the experience is in reading on it?
Sure. Well, so since we're talking about web, I'll concentrate on that. But so a screen reader is a software that is either preloaded or has to be loaded on your computer. And it has a voice or several voices. And then the screen reader, what it does is it will help you navigate through the whole system. The issue here is that the mouse will not work on Windows at all. So you have to, there is even controlling the mouse pointer, you have to get into kind of like a mouse mode, and you have to be a highly potent user to understand it, and also you have to use everything through the keyboard. So we use, like Laura says, you know, a lot of keyboards and shortcuts, and we have to do a lot of memorization of these different commands that will allow us to do things. So if you are on the internet, most all screen readers will give you a choice to navigate by heading, by links, or to group all the text, or it will allow you to find what frames you have. So then we can quickly jump from one to the other. If those things are not clear and they're not well described, then it creates problems. And otherwise, what we'll do is most people, if you give it to a blind person that don't know a lot about screen readers, first thing they will do when they get into a browser is they're going to use their tab key or the arrow keys, and then they just going to tab through, or they going to arrow through all the website. So if it's the first time I'm in there and I don't understand what's the layout and what kind of information I'm trying to get, I will spend a lot of time tabbing through the whole website until I can actually get what I need. And so search is very important. I've noticed that many pages people are taking their search button away, and that is very important for anybody that's trying to get to something really quick. And so the screen reader will tell you, you know, whatever the pointer is going through, and will tell you what it is. What I run into a lot is if I put into a link mode, for example, and I'm searching for links, and let's see, I'm in Yahoo, and I decided I want to look for, I don't know, Macworld review or something. So I'm going to press M to see all the Mac links, or all the links that starts with M. But often people put the alt tag of the link is image something something, image something something, icon something something. So if you put that in front of what matters, all I'm going to find is eyes, and I don't find any initial letter. So that's very important to take out. And that's basically how a screen reader works.
Great, terrific. And let me go through a couple of, as kind of practically what this means for us who are trying to design for screen readers. First, thinking that, so Rachel mentioned kind of trying to get a sense of how the site is laid out and what's going on with it. One of the things that can really be helpful there is thinking about the order of your content. So do you want to make sure that the physical order of your code, so if you look at the code of your site, that the content is in the right order, as opposed to just relying on the visual order. So they tend to be the same unless you muck around with it a lot. But if you do a lot of things with, you know, tables for formatting and stuff like that, you could have, you know, in actuality, your navigation bar is halfway down through the content, and the key stuff that shows up at the top of the page is in the very bottom of the text of the code. So you want to make sure that you're not doing things to break the order of the content.
Yeah, and I know you're going to mention, but I think,
Go for it.
Sorry. I know you're going to mention, but yeah, in this whole navigation order, it's very important to perhaps have, a breakdown of them. Like, so if you create a wireframe and you can have that breakdown, then now you can create buttons such as, skip to next content, or skip to the global bar, or skip to the secondary bar, or whatever, how many sections, important sections that you need to get to fast on your website.
Absolutely. So thinking about, just a quick thing prior to that. So you want to make sure that you avoid complicated JavaScript menus, so you can basically break someone's ability to navigate altogether by having dynamic menus that fly around and stuff like that, and often have really no actual link for a screen reader to export to. Here's the idea that Rachel was talking about, the idea of skipping the navigation to allow people, so if you have a navigation bar that's on the top of every page, to give a quick link to allow people to skip it to get to the meat of the page, which can be a really handy way for people who are using something other than a traditional browser to navigate around.
And in the same topic, what you could do is have a button also that overrules all those Java super cool scripts. So you create a trade HTML, and you can have your nice script, but you can have a button that says disable scripts. So now I can click on it, and I can use it normally, so I don't have to run into those little nice pull-down menus that will show up when I supposedly pass over a link, because that won't happen to me. But those links have to be there, and also you have to make sure that just because you said disable scripts, all the functionalities of the scripts are still in there. I can still get to all the information the same way as everybody else. The only difference is we put the coolness factor out.
Yep. Yep.
One other thing on screen readers, I mean, it's definitely a great idea if you can get someone with a screen reader to test the site. Alternatively, a lot of libraries have screen readers available, and I went in, used JAWS. It will take you a little while to get used to it. It's very quick, but it's a way that even somebody who's not used to using it can easily find some of the larger errors pretty quickly in testing it. The software is pretty expensive. It's several $100s to install one, but that access through a library can be very valuable for testing.
Actually, I have some info on that. JAWS has a 40-minute mode, so if you put a demo for 40 minutes, you can use it, and then you're going to have to reboot your computer to use for 40 more minutes. It's annoying, but serves you the trip to the library. But make sure that you're not just clicking with your mouse in selecting the text and then JAWS reading. You go like, oh, great, it reads, because I am not going to use the mouse. Somebody with dyslexia will, but you have to make sure that you can navigate there through the through the keyboard, and then if you're on a Mac, which kind of a lot of people think that blind people don't use Mac, but there's more and more people using it now. So I'm actually a Mac user. So VoiceOver is already built in. You do a Command F5, it turns it on. You can use it and turn it off.
Fantastic. Another kind of area of not breaking things that work automatically is the idea of using standard HTML headers. So in your code, to make sure that you are actually using this tag H1 and tag H2 to actually designate what are your titles and subtitles. And you can style them however way you want. You can put a style sheet behind it so they show up really pretty and match your site. But if you define your own style, so if you instead have something that says, header 1, and you just arbitrarily name it that, it will affect screen readers' ability to know that it is a header. They'll often, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, is that often people who are using a screen reader will create a kind of a table of contents of a page by looking at the headers in particular. But if you don't use the headers, then that doesn't work.
That is correct. And a lot of times in the CSS, you can create a header, so you make the font, the header size, and all that. But that will not recognize my screen reader when I put on that heading mode for it to display all that, table of contents. It's not going to be able to do it because now it doesn't understand that that heading that looks like a heading is not a heading. So it has to be an HTML heading first, and then you can make it look as pretty as you want.
Absolutely. And Rachel alluded to this. So in thinking about your links, a lot of people navigate with a screen reader kind of from link to link. But if your links are called click here, then it's impossible to know what they do. So it's important. It is good for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is so you want this to say, instead of click here or find out more, you want to make sure that it says, read about, eviction processes or something that will actually be useful.
Yeah, so this happens a lot on blogs because you have a little, the little what do you call it, snippet, and then it says read more. If I'm actually reading the page with the arrows for the whole page, that is useful. If I'm just looking for, like, say, a news, and I want something specific, and I put on that link mode, and I'm just going to get a bunch of read more, read more, read more, read more, and I don't know which one is it's useful. So it's better to put, even if it's one-word title, like, I don't know, the fall of something, read more. And then now I know I can click on that.
Absolutely. And Kathleen has a tactical question. Does your screen reader indexing software pick up H2s and H3s as well as H1s? I'm thinking it does, yes?
Yes. It gets all sizes, all up to, I think, H6 is perhaps the last one, I believe.
And Jane actually has a really great point into the chat, and something that I've experienced myself. She said, I remember seeing a demo of a JAWS screen reader at the 2001 TIG conference, and they slowed it down a lot, but it was still incredibly fast and difficult to get used to. Yeah, I think that it is, I think as Brian points out, you can find potentially big issues, but I think that trying out for yourself without a lot of practice in using a screen reader to try to figure out how accessible your site is through a screen reader is a bit dangerous because they are, in fact, just fairly complicated and use a lot of, like, keyboard shortcuts and stuff like that. So it may, I think many sites are going to seem incredibly hard to use if you are just trying a screen reader for the first time because you don't really know how to use the screen reader. So it can be potentially so just trying one out. It's certainly a good way to get a sense as to what it's like, but possibly not a great way to identify, anything more than really high-level issues in your site because you'll identify more potentially than there are.
Yeah, and then there is there's people that you can contact to do really quick. For years I did that. Now I have people doing it for me. But you can always get somebody that can do a quick check, like an hour, do all the checks that you need for the overall issues. And so there's a lot of people out there doing the same thing. So you can type, or I can send some links of people that I know that does that. The other thing that we can, do is I'm creating a check sheet. So then hopefully if okay, check, did I do this, did I do that, then you know for sure that it will work on a screen reader.
Yep.
Yeah, links or contact information would be great. We would love to add that to our accessibility guide also.
Sure, I'll do.
Great. So if you send that to me, Rachel, I will send that out.
Okay.
Just one last very quick point in regards to kind of our screen reader topic. In fact, Kathleen points out in the chat that all caps. all caps is bad from a screen reader perspective because it'll be emphasized and possibly it'll get mistaken for an acronym. As Kathleen points out, it's kind of a bad idea for anyone who is attempting to read quickly. All right, so we're having a great conversation here, and I feel like people are adding their questions and comments into the chat. Anybody have anything that they've been holding on to in regard to kind of this whole idea of using designing for those with screen reader? All right, let's talk a little bit about designing for those who aren't using a mouse. Maybe I will take, so if you don't mind, Brian and Rachel, maybe I will take about 3 minutes to just kind of run through this, and then I'll turn it over to you guys to kind of add a perspective on it. I just want to make sure, for the sake of time, that we're able to kind of get through all of our stuff. So thinking about people who don't use a mouse, which is a lot of people. So this is potentially not just people who are like physically cannot move their hands, but people who are perhaps elderly and don't have a lot of mobility, people who are using screen readers, and people who just prefer to use a keyboard to a mouse. So we've talked a lot about some of these same ideas. So as opposed to having really deep menus that you need to click a lot through, just having a list of links can be a really useful navigational shortcut for people who want to pop directly to the thing that they want to see. And a list you can fairly easily tab or arrow through. And you want to make sure that you don't break keyboard shortcuts. So for instance, most browsers you can tab to the options. You can click Alt and an underlined letter to get to a particular place in a form. You want to, if something is substantially interactive, you want to make sure that you think about this stuff. So that how is someone going to actually get through this using a mouse and not using a mouse? And you, at a minimum, want to at least make sure you don't break them. And as kind of on the same light, you want to think about the tab order of your form. So any form, if you just sit there hitting tab, 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 will jump from field to field. It's fairly straightforward actually to build forms in which the tab order is visually messed up, that it for whatever reason you've coded it in a way that the tab order jumps around as opposed to moving intuitively, and that can be pretty frustrating to someone who's just trying to tab around. All right, so that was kind of my sprint through websites for folks with mobility issues. Rachel, I suspect that you have some stuff to add here. Thoughts in this area?
Well, you covered really well. I mean, it all goes back to that same, need for being able to use a keyboard. And if you have mobility, a lot of people will use, sticky keys. That means that they will kind of wait for their movement so they can click. And then if their hands are still on top of that key, they won't keep pressing the key. So there is several accessibilities with the keyboard for mobility, and you want to be able to give that person the time to click, and all the things that Laura covered. The other thing that's very important on that sense is I haven't seen it much, but I see sometimes people like to refresh their forms. And if you do that in somebody that has mobility and it takes them a lot longer than most of us, then what's going to happen is they're halfway through the form and then you kind of kick them out because you kick it back to the top of the page, you refresh, and then they have to start again. And after they do that 3 times, they're very frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, anything to add in regard to keyboard navigation?
No, I think you definitely covered it. It is also something that you can do yourself and try. It is much easier than using a screen reader to test on your own.
That's an excellent point, to basically say, all right, I'm going to get through this website without using a mouse or any pointing device. How can I do? So, Terrific. And then we have kind of this wind-up topic, which just hits a couple of the same themes that we've already hit, which is so step 6, code pages according to standards. So we've talked about a number of these already, but the basic gist is that in general, browsers will support things like screen readers and navigation by keyboard unless you do weird things that break them. So you want to, in general, code things in a way that things want to be coded as opposed to doing fancy workarounds. You want to, wherever possible, use standard HTML to create links. So if things, for instance, like a drop-down box or a navigation flyout that does something that you select without actually clicking is like basically impossible for someone to use without a mouse or on a screen reader. So is something definitely to avoid. And just basically the general gist here. So if you're relying on, you shouldn't rely on fancy stuff to actually provide the content of your site. So you should be able to, and this is another thing that it's fairly easy to test for, you should be able to turn off your style sheets, your scripts, your applets, anything that is programmatic, and your content should still be visible. It might be, ugly and not nearly as, as polished as you would like it to appear, but it should exist. If you turn them off and the stuff no longer shows up, then you know you've got an accessibility issue. And lastly, use things like tables and lists from a coding perspective. Use them thoughtfully and use them ideally actually for tables and lists. People use them sometimes to force things into, so like they might say, all right, I'm going to create an unordered list in the HTML code in order to simply make these things appear down this column. Things like unordered lists and tables and table headers have specific meanings to folks who are using accessibility devices, and you will mess them up by doing weird things with them. So don't. So the basic gist of this section is stay with the standards unless you have some really important reason to do things in a different way.
Yep.
Rachel, thoughts?
You cut out there a little
Rachel.
bit. What did you say?
I just was wondering whether you had thoughts on this particular section.
Oh, yes. Hi. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Just keep it simple.
Yep.
Great. That separation of content from style sheet is extremely important, not only because of how it works with current accessible technologies, but also for future technologies, because this type of a standard of being able to get at the content separate from the style sheet is what a new technology is often built on. Your major content management systems, things like WordPress and Drupal, have this functionality built in. Whenever you're trying a new tool, you want to take a look at this and see if it is an option, because it's something that at least some of the slicker, cooler looking from a design perspective new tools that I've seen recently do not do. They merge this too much, and if you can't separate out that content, it's most likely inaccessible for current tools and future tools.
Brian, and you brought up a point that I actually forgot, which is, those typical web tools like builders that you can drag and drop a lot. Most of them have a lot of background image security, and that is most likely not going to be a full HTML. So you have to be aware if that is letting you do that or not. Otherwise, your page is just a bunch of images, basically.
Yes. Terrific. All right, so that reaches the end of our walkthrough of kind of the key steps in usability, which leaves us to, we're going to talk about some tools for testing the accessibility of your website, and then we're going to wind up by looking at what is actually in the 508 standards in regards to accessibility. Does anybody have any questions or comments about kind of anything else that one might be, that you might be thinking about tactically is a good idea or possibly a bad idea or whatever in terms of accessibility? So you can enter it into the chat or star 6 to unmute yourself.
And one other thing when using one of those very popular content management systems is the templates that individuals create for those. Some of them are great on accessibility and some of them are not. So even if you're using Drupal, WordPress, or another very major content management system that has that accessibility built in, you need to test it whenever you change or update a template.
Absolutely. And in fact, for those who are looking for more information on that, we have our Idealware's Consumer's Guide to Content Management System actually looks at a number of accessibility criteria for, I think, 12 different content management systems. All right. So all that being said, how do you know? We've talked through a couple of methods that you can use to, like for instance, you can turn off all your scripts and your style sheets and see what things look like without it. There's other options. A big one and a fairly popular one is called WAVE, which is an acronym, Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. It's free. And it will, you can actually look at your site, so you can load in your own URL. So this is the Idealware website that we're looking on. And it will highlight potential accessibility issues for you, especially in regard to things like alt text and headers and links and forms, so things that are a little more straightforward to find from a coding perspective. Rachel, do you have experience in using WAVE to find issues?
I think you're covered.
Great.
Yeah, we added WAVE to our accessibility guide. It's a great tool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. There's also a accessibility extension for Firefox. So it basically you can install it as an extension, and then it does it'll test out the text, the scripting, styles, things like that. So it can it tests a lot of the overlap with things on WAVE, but will take a look at some of the more technical things around your, like for your scripting in addition. Here's a potential, so a screen reader simulation is kind of an interesting thing because you could like actually use, so as long as you can actually hear, you could certainly use a screen reader. But as we mentioned, they are pretty complicated and pretty, they often rely on you knowing a fair amount of it. You can also use something like, right here we're looking at the WebAIM screen reader simulation, which allows you to think through the navigation of the web with a screen reader. It kind of gives you a sense of what the experience is for someone using it. Here's a different, so Liz and Brian had highlighted colorfilter.wikline.org as a possible way to look at how your site is impacted, or it looks for the colorblind. VizCheck is another one. They sound very similar. It will basically simulate the different kinds of colorblindness, and you can see your site through that filter. So those are some of the top line resources that we've seen used to test accessibility. Rachel, are there other key resources that you'd recommend here?
No, I think you cover the most widely used, and then it's really now I don't see much out there right now. That's why I'm working on that kind of check sheet idea because there isn't much more out there.
Yeah, and in your opinion, how many of the issues can you find through these things, as opposed to hiring somebody who is a real expert? I know you don't do this anymore, so like a consult. But do you feel like
no, now I have people doing it for me.
Can you find most of the stuff yourself?
Yeah, I think the issue right there, like out there right now, is this disparity of knowledge. Because even when you hire somebody, the question is, what kind of user they are. So in my research, I found out that there is kind of 3 types of users in the screen reader arena, or even assistive technology in general. You'll have like the newbies, people that actually don't, they know how to use it, but they use it without the power of the commands. They learn really basic commands and do it that way. And then you have the people that have a lot of work and need to get stuff done, so they get a little more acquainted, and now they are able to use, invisible cursors and mouse cursors and etc. and get some things done. And then you have the power users, which are people that really understand, and those are the ones who actually participate a lot in lists and help other people learn. So I think that's the issue right now, and there isn't really standards out there at this point. There is a lot of opinions, and I think very little research to back up many of those informations.
Well, and it is definitely a skill that you get better at over time, and that by getting feedback from different users, you will get better at spotting issues yourself. I definitely know that the first time that I attempted to do a check, probably about 10, 12 years ago, probably only picked up 25–30% of the issues that were there, even with a tool that thought it was pointing out a lot more than that. But your second or third time, especially when you get feedback from somebody who knows what they're doing, you can significantly improve that.
Yeah. So
yeah, I had to become a developer too, Yeah, I had to, for example, I had to learn how to code in order to be able to give feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like the gist is that you can do some things yourself, but if you're really serious in this area, it may well be useful to hire someone at least to kick you off and to help you understand what to look like and to look for and to build your own experience.
Yep.
Great. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the standards that exist in this area. And so it's difficult, I think, in most circles to talk much about accessibility without either W3C or 508. There's good reasons for that. So they are standards that are out there to help us think about this stuff. But I think that they're both fairly technical standards. So it's easy to lose, to my mind, the actual, disabled person in the whole list of, technical things that you're supposed to be doing. So let's just define these 2 standards. So Section 508 is actually, it is a section, which is section number 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, is specifically about making sure that federal agencies, and generally accepted to mean people who are funded by federal agencies, make their electronic and information technology available to people with disabilities. So basically, and you can be sued if you violate this. So that is Section 508. W3C is a different type of thing. W3C is a set of guidelines, which it's generally thought of as kind of a better, in quotes, set of standards, so a more useful set of standards in actually making your website useful for those with disabilities. However, it is not binding and is not used by anyone. There's a kind of often movement afoot to try to get the federal government to recognize W3C as opposed to 508, but so far there hasn't been much actual action in this realm. What would be, so they are similar in practice. So sometimes one has more strict rules in one area and sometimes the other, but rather mostly the difference is that they cover similar things, but W3C is not actually required, but it's a set of guidelines. We're going to talk through 508. So a lot of this, obviously, 508 is not an entirely separate set of things that we haven't talked about yet. Is mostly a review of what we talked about, but I suspected that people would really care about what 508 actually says that you should be doing. Just going back to our conversation before, Kathleen has a question in the chat for Brian. So Brian, I gather from your comment that there is no standard that Drupal developers must meet before releasing a new module?
There's some recommendations out there, but not neither of the big communities for WordPress or Drupal require that modules have a specific accessibility. For things to make it into the core, they're definitely checked for accessibility, but if somebody has their own template or their own module, because of the defederated open source community, some of those do not necessarily go through any accessibility testing.
And I would say that to me, it's likely that they have not, unless it's specific, unless the template specifically says that it is geared towards accessibility. It is likely that no one has thought about accessibility. And the same is true at Drupal and WordPress. WordPress its community is a little more accessibility minded than Drupal. Drupal, for instance, the admin interface itself is not generally considered accessible.
Or usable.
But, both of them. Yes. That's a somewhat bolder statement. But, both of them, you're basically community contributions. I think you have to assume that they are not accessible unless it says that there has been some thought to it, and then you would want to check it.
Right.
All right. So let's just talk through what 508 actually says. So in terms of visual elements, you should provide a text alternative for every non-text element. So we talked about this, so you shouldn't be relying on non-text things, so either videos or images to provide your content. Videos and animations should have accompanying captions. All information conveyed with color should be clear without color. So basically, all of this stuff, if someone it can't actually see or hear, can get the equivalent information. Interactive elements. So we're looking at making sure that basically forms work properly. So things are labeled properly. Things are accessible through keyboard shortcuts and screen readers. Allow users to skip repetitive navigation is included in the 508 guidelines. So for instance, the ability to hit a skip navigation link. And I don't know if this actually applies much to this community. Excuse me. But if a timed response is required to give the user sufficient time if they're going to require more because of what they're using. So thinking about the people using assistive technologies in a timed function. Technical elements, of which there are a huge amount of in the 508. So you want to think about, I'm not going to go all the way through these. You can read these for yourself. This is the idea of we are doing normal things with data cells and frames, and so image maps if you're relying on them. So that's basically you break up an image and make the images themselves links to provide alternative links there. So this is one of my favorite. I'm not quite sure for what reason you would want to do this, but you shouldn't cause your screen to flicker because it will cause problems for folks with epilepsy. So no like bold blinking things on your website. Ensure your content is always legible. So this is precisely what we've talked about. So when you turn off everything, the content should still be legible. Downloads for things that you might need, like applets or plugins, should be provided. And the guidelines actually fairly clearly give a kind of an out or a catch-all, which is that in general, if you cannot make something accessible, you can provide a equivalent, which is actually equivalent, presumably is not a really crappy rendition of the original. So an equivalent which is accessible, which is then
Hello?
Hello, Laura?
all right. The line is talking to me, but I think I'm back now. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you are.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
did
cool.
lose you for
Sorry,
about 20 seconds, but I can hear you now.
I got someone, an operator recording talking to me. So cool. So the idea of this equivalent information is that it should be updated. It should be as good, and it should be updated whenever the primary page changes. Rachel, any key? I know that you're fairly familiar with these standards. Any key elements that you feel like people often run into that I've forgotten to mention?
On the law? I think you'll cover most of it.
On 508. Is that a good coverage?
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing that, I mean, and I don't know if we have higher education people on the line, but something that is very important is that if you get through if you get filed a file complaint and you are a 508 section institution that should be compliant and you receive federal funds, all your federal funds could be, I guess, taken away.
Right. So, yes, and most of these folks are, in fact, federally funded. So I do need to think about this stuff.
Yeah, because it's very important until somebody decides to make a check on you. Right.
Yeah, so there is so it's not like the government, it's actually a good point. It's not like the government is going around doing audits. This is, so like other disability laws, it's like, so it doesn't actually matter that your store is not handicapped accessible in terms of the law until somebody who is handicapped sues you to make you think about it. But then there could be big penalties. So it is certainly worthwhile from a risk mitigation perspective as well as just a human perspective of supporting people.
Right. Yep.
So, and this brings this idea of balancing the legal versus the human requirements. The statute is such that you could probably make your site 508 compliant without doing much that would actually be very helpful for people who have accessibility issues. You could certainly do a fair amount that would be helpful for people with disabilities without being 508 compliant. So trying to weigh both the laws and the actual humans that you are supporting, and always remembering the possibility of providing like an alternative page. It doesn't necessarily mean you now need to redo your entire website as much as potentially provide workarounds for things that are not currently usable by somebody with a disability.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, alternative pages are great. Just be aware of one thing that happens a lot is that sometimes you make an alternative page, and what happens is as you're updating the main page and creating new features to it, often that basic alternative page gets out of date and it doesn't offer the same features, and then that's still going to violate Section 508.
Yep, absolutely. Great, and they are asking, we are using Camtasia to provide brief how-to videos. They allow for closed captioning, which purports to be ADA compliant, in quotes. What issues should we be thinking about with regards to videos? Rachel, thoughts on that question? So what types of things, so in addition potentially to closed captioning, should they be thinking about for videos?
What system are they using again?
Camtasia?
Oh, okay. Well, usually, and then that's what's important to understand. If they say ADA compliant, doesn't mean Section 508 compliant. So ADA compliant, it could be just that they have the ability to place closed caption. But that does not mean that that caption, for example, will be screen reader friendly, or it does not mean that that they will have functions for you to create audio description. So that's where it becomes complicated, and that's what you have to look at. I haven't used them in several months, so I'm not really sure what that means. I could take a look and maybe even follow up with you later. But, you know, it's very important to perhaps have, now with the text-to-speech technology, it's very easy for you to have your video you created. Now you have a script, and then that script can be actually read by a text-to-speech and kind of overlaid, embedded on top of the video for describing. It's just a matter of timing. So that is something interesting to do. We're trying to do a workshop on it, but I don't know when it's going to happen. But that's what we kind of recommending, so you can have a nice text-to-speech on the parts that are important to see something. So the audio description will automatically describe, and then you didn't have to do a whole lot of extra work, and you can place both videos. So for audio description, you can click, and then that other video will come in.
And is
I hope
that
answers the question.
Using the, yeah, is that using, so that text-to-speech method that you're recommending, is that specifically using YouTube, or does that apply to videos that are produced in different ways?
No, it can be applied in different ways. We use, for example, well, we use YouTube, but we use Final Cut Pro to edit and create many of our videos. But most high-end video production softwares will give you the ability to place that audio, and well, the Mac already comes with good quality voice text-to-speech. And Windows sometimes have, I guess Windows 7 and 8 have good text-to-speech voices, but otherwise you have to buy, and Acapella and Nuance offer some text-to-speach voices that are more human-like, and you can buy them.
Interesting. Great. So it sounds like, to the initial question, that the key questions are do the captions simply exist but are like images or embedded in the video, or are they actually screen readable? Sorry, Rachel, there was one other key thing that you mentioned that they should be testing for to check whether it's not just ADA compliant but also 508 compliant.
Yes, it's actually what does 88 means, and it's 88 versus Section 508. And then the other thing is, do they have ability, or not, for creating audio description? Is that what they mean by ADA compliant or not? But you can always, as I said, you can always create that audio description in any, decent video editor.
Yep, absolutely. So we have a couple of questions, which we're definitely going to get to. Let me just give us kind of a closing frame, and then we will come back to the question. So basically, we're thinking about this idea of accessibility and balancing the law versus humans, thinking through kind of what simple changes you might make, what more robust changes you could make to text, images, videos, forms, navigation, all sorts of stuff, with the idea of ultimately letting everyone benefit from your services. So this is not simply something that you do because Section 508 says you should, but because there are real humans that will benefit from this. Fantastic. And with that, we are open.
And before we close up with questions, I just want to also remind people that we have a webinar coming up next week on mobile strategy to reach out to clients. It's this same time, same URL, a week from now. And then July, we've got a discussion type roundtable coming up, but our next webinars after that will be in August, in which we have 2 of them coming up on website security. So next week, mobile, August, 2 on website security.
Fantastic. And there was also, you wanted to mention, I think that there was a survey for this particular webinar?
Liz just posted the URL in the chat. There's a SurveyMonkey link there. Excellent. Good timing.
Absolutely. Great. All right. So, Rachel, we have a number of questions for you. So Kathleen says, we have been playing with the free version of Phyware, P-H-I-W-A-R-E. Does Rachel have any opinion about this tool? Do you know Phyware, Rachel?
Actually, that's actually one of on our checklist for us to be playing with. I haven't used it now. I have read a couple of things, but I don't have any particular opinion on it yet. Jonathan and I are supposed to be working on them soon, and I apologize for that.
No problem. The Maryland State Law Library asks, is embedding a video into a website a problem for screen readers?
It depends. It depends how you're embedding it. So, and then it also depends a lot. So if you're using WordPress, it will depend what plugin you're using to embed it, to display that embed. If you're just using straight HTML and you embed a YouTube HTML one, usually the embed is okay. If you embed a Flash, that usually becomes an issue because it's just going to tell you a bunch of numbers in Flash. If you are using Vimeo or other sites, there is also a similar problem. And I can't remember right now because I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's either Bleep or somebody that if you embed their, their videos, you won't be able to read. So I really have to look at, is it HTML or is it Flash, and you can embed, and then if you can run it with a demo of a screen reader really quick, just tab all the way through the page and see if you can see the embedded video or not. The other thing that you can do is, if it's a YouTube, then you can put the name, and then you can kind of hide the link behind the name and say, see this video. And then that's what I usually do. I embed a video. If it's not accessible, I put a link straight to the YouTube and will open in a new window.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons that we went with YouTube as the primary hoster for the LSNTAP channel.
Great. Michelle asks, how do we find a compliance consultant? Rachel, is there any central source to find such people?
No, I'm actually creating one right now, but it's not ready. And it's going to be called Accessibility Check. There's nothing there right now. What I'm trying to do is create a sort of like a nonprofit, so I'm waiting for the paperwork so we can actually qualify and train specialists that can do this fast, and we can guarantee the outcome. but
That is
as
exciting.
of now, there
timeframe on that?
isn't. Well, it's going to be
So can we,
accessibilitycheck.com.
Can we share that on the listserv when that comes out, Brian?
Definitely, and I'm definitely willing to be involved or help out however possible. So sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks. I hadn't displayed to anybody yet, but and then the only other good place that I know that you can get people that know how to do webs is the nsb.org, which is the National Federation for the Blind. They do train people on checking accessibilities, and they have a web list that you can always reclass people and so on, and they have standards. But in my experience, I want to be sure that the people that work for me will be not just knowledgeable in accessibility of the web, but also understand design principles and usability principles, because that's more than just does this work or not. You have to understand why it doesn't work, and you have to be able to give alternatives and solutions.
Yep. Yes, certainly let me know as well, Rachel. That sounds like a tremendous thing. Let me know if I can help or promote or any of those good things.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I'm just having a lawyer work on paperwork.
Great. Fantastic. All right, and I think that we are at the end of questions. Anybody else have any questions before we wind up? 5-second warning.
I just want to make a. All right, can I just make a final remark?
Go for it.
I think that if you think about accessibility, going forward, really, I would say 70% of accessibility is good navigation. So if you pay attention into that whole organization side, you have 70% of that battle worked. And then I would say, 15% of that is going to be tags, alt tag, and all that, that we covered today. And the other 15 is really usability and intuitive. How intuitive is it? How easy is it? And then if you have those three elements together, you got your accessibility on the pocket.
Yep. Great.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been a very, very informative webinar. I'd like to remind people that we did take a screen capture of this, and we'll be posting it up on YouTube, and we'll be sharing it with the community widely. Thank you. It's a wonderful webinar.
Terrific. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us, and hope to see you at another seminar soon.